review some of the work we did last time and go into it in a little more slowly so that we're sure we understand what the issue is that makes it interesting to talk about Nietzsche and epigenetics. First, here is the title of his autobiography. It is Ecce Homo. And he composed Ecce Homo beginning on October 15th of 1888. By January 6th of 1889, he was already in a mental institution. Now, there are many things about Ecce Homo that make it sound as if, I hardly know, that make it sound as if, gee, when I look at some of the sentences of Ecce Homo, and even if I don't get as far as the sentences, just looking at those chapter titles, it sounds to me like he was crazy when he wrote it. After all, what are the chapter titles? 1. Why I am so wise. And 2 is why I am so clever. And 3 is why I write such good books. And 4 is why I am a destiny. Okay. And we said, well, those look like the statements of a crazy person who thinks that is a name for this kind of mental disease in the West. It's an extreme form of ego. It's called megalomania. A lot of the Roman emperors had it in the Western understanding of its history. The Roman emperors thought they were gods. Even Julius Caesar insisted on being hailed as a god. Well, those are people whose idea of their self-importance and their achievements had gotten out of hand. And it goes way back. There were Romans said, oh, there was a Roman general who conquered Carthage in the Punic Wars, and he said, oh, I have achieved such tremendous things that I must be descended from gods. And of course, Alexander the Great, before him, thought that he was descended from God. And his mother always told him that he was. So we, looking back on that, have decided that that's thinking that you're too great, too wonderful, so great and wonderful that you could be a god, and everybody has to bow down to you. Okay. So many people have, looking at the chapter titles and looking at some of the strange things he says in Ecce Homo, people have concluded that, well, perhaps his mental disease, whatever it was, if it was a mental disease, or breakdown, or whatever happened to him, maybe it was a physical disease of the brain, we don't really know. Whatever it was, we might think so, was already affecting him when he began Ecce Homo. Okay. However, we do a little research and we find out some interesting facts about Ecce Homo. One, Ecce Homo, we said, is a long foreword. It's a long preface, it's a long introduction. And there's no question about the fact that that's why he wrote it, because we have letters in which he says, well, I want to see my autobiography, Ecce Homo, published at the same time as this other long work that I'm creating. The other long work that he's creating was a 4-volume work. At least at the time that he started Ecce Homo, his intention was to produce a 4-volume work called The Revaluation of All Values. The Revaluation of All Values. Okay. Now, as the months progressed, from October, November, December, his plans didn't change, and people never found, we got what appears to have been book 1 of the reevaluation of all values, and that was called the Antichrist. The Antichrist, we have that. And for a long time, he was referring to the Antichrist as the first of the 4 volumes of the reevaluation of all values. First of the 4 volumes that will be comprised under this general title. You all with me? As time goes by, from December, October, November, he seems to have dropped the idea of writing the other 3 volumes. And then, because, well, for whatever reasons, we're going in, and then seems to not any longer call the Antichrist Volume 1 of it, and just changes its title. And its subtitle is going to be, its title would have been the Antichrist Volume 1 of the Reevaluation of All Values, but he changed it at the very, very end, and he titled it A Curse on Christianity. He titled it A Curse on Christianity. There's an important reason for that. It doesn't really alter the reevaluation idea as much as you might think. The reason is that there's a passage in his notes in which he speaks of the difference between the image of Christ crucified and the idea of a God in Greek religion. We don't care about the Greek religion side. We just care about the idea behind Christ crucified. And he says, the idea of Jesus Christ being crucified on the cross, innocent of any crime, and innocent, that's the key thought, supremely innocent, without stain of any human sin at all. Because human beings could not sacrifice themselves to God because we are unworthy, because we are all suffering from the stain of sin. Jesus had no sin, and so he was a perfect sacrifice. And so completely, 100%, the most innocent thing you could imagine, God crucified. What could be wrong with a world that would crucify innocence? What a terrible, sinful world it must be. What a horrible place this must be. And so Nietzsche says, the image of Christ as the innocent hanging on the cross is a curse on life. So it's possible, I don't know for sure, we don't know, I'm not making that up, as if I did know, but it's possible that he had that passage in mind as Christ on the cross being a curse on life when he reevaluated the idea and said, you know what, back at you, a curse on Christianity. Okay, but that aside, that's just pretty speculative. I don't know for sure about that. But I do know the rest of this. So there are letters. There's one letter to his publisher that says, hey, I want Ecce Homo to appear first, and then I want Ecce Homo and the Antichrist to appear at the same time. They should be. I want them to come before the public in this as a forward, and then this work, the Antichrist. And he says that to his publisher, he says it to a friend, and the friend as late as December 20th of 1888. So way into the process here, he's still of whatever happened to him, if it was a process, we don't know. It may have been that suddenly he broke down. I don't know. We don't know. But at any rate, rather late into this time frame, the last 102 days of his time in the city of Turin, where he was staying. So it's often called Nietzsche's Time in Turin, or Nietzsche's Breakdown in Turin is sometimes the title of articles. Rather late, he's still thinking of Ecce Homo and the Antichrist, and Ecce Homo being the forward to the Antichrist. Okay. What is the idea of a reevaluation of all values? And when we understand that idea, we'll understand a little bit more about the chapter title, Why I Am So Wise. I said a little bit about why I'm so clever. We'll go through all the chapter titles with some detail, but But my position is they are not the expressions of egotism that they are said to be. Clever, we said, the German word was klug, and klug does not mean clever. Klug means prudent. And there's plenty of references in German literature before that in which the word klug appears in a context of meaning prudent, and if you were to substitute clever, it would make no sense at all. So I'm not sure that there's such, and then also in Ecce Homo itself, there are examples of what he calls klugheit, cleverness. What doesn't really fit what he means. Here's another example of klugheit, and when you see the example of klugheit, the word cleverness is not a good translation, but the word prudent would be. So it's probably the case that this translation, with its connotations in English of being a boast, is probably not the best possible translation. It would be better to call it of klugheit. It would be better to say prudent. Good books, I'll have something to say about that, and Destiny, I'll have something to say about that. But right now, let me work on why I am so wise. So I'm going to try to explain what this title means in connection with the idea of a values revaluation. So the main point is, to start is, what is a values revaluation? What does that even mean? And it's mostly directed against the values of Christianity. And the primary value of Christianity that he's revaluing is the category of pity, compassion. Boy, if there's no more fundamental value than compassion for Western thought, especially in his time, his teacher, that he read the works of this guy very dedicatedly, and wrote a book on this author as an educator of him, Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer wrote a book on on pity as the basis of morality. Pity, compassion, the ability to empathize with your fellow human being, the ability to put yourself in the other person's situation. And now that I do that, I realize, oh, I can't treat that other person like that. How would it be if they treated me like that? So the ability to feel with and for another. Okay. Pity, feeling, I've got more than a little bit here. Feeling with and for another. And that is the unshakable rock foundation of ethics and morality in Western society, is to feel pity, the capacity to feel pity. Okay. Nietzsche had a complicated argument for believing that feeling pity is really not such a good thing. That if we probe beneath the surface of the feeling of pity, what we'll find is a feeling beneath it that pity does not admit to having, and that feeling is resentment and revenge. Now that's a pretty complicated idea, but in Nietzsche's study of the emotion of pity, he says, I have stripped aside the mask of pity and seen beneath it the reality of the feeling of vengefulness and vindictiveness. Now that's kind of a complicated idea. We're not going to deal with that today. But the idea of revaluation then becomes, oh, guess what? You've been for centuries and centuries putting pity forward as the foundation of morality and as the highest value that a human being can achieve. I'm such a fulfilled, advanced, ethical, moral human being that I have this great, well-developed capacity to feel pity. And Nietzsche says, no, that is not a value that we should identify with. If anything, that value will take us on the pathway of declining, descending, decaying life. And that's its real intention. I'll give you some evidence of that later on. But the main idea is that the values that we have had so far in Western society have been leading us in the direction opposite to what nature wants life to be. And so we have to undo those values and produce the set of values that do reflect the advance and development of life. All right, take a look at here. This is a passage from his work, The Will to Power. Okay. Look at this sentence beginning here. Which values or what values does Christianity deny? You might not realize this, but he says, but if you study Christianity very carefully, you'll see that it's denying all of the values that advance life. So we need to undo its values and reverse them and turn them upside down, because they're what's keeping us behind in our advance as a species, evolution in an evolutionary way. What does the ideal that Christianity opposes stand for? So here's the opposite ideal of Christianity. This is what Christianity fights against. And is this such really a good thing to fight against? Pride. Is that bad? The feeling of distance. A feeling of great responsibility is all fought against by Christianity. I shouldn't have responsibility for anything. I should just surrender any responsibility for my own life or for the lives of anybody around me to the hands of God, and be the childlike innocent who thinks that God, and in my simple childlike humble innocence, I believe God will take care of all of my needs. And I don't have to exercise self-responsibility or responsibility for the welfare of the world or the welfare of humanity or the advance of humanity and nature. That's crazy. If you don't take responsibility for the development of the human spirit, it will decay. Exuberant spirits, splendid animalism, the instincts of war, conquest, those are all old great Greek values before the Christianization of the West. The instinct of war and conquest. You read the Iliad and you read the long succession of Greek heroes in history, Alexander, all the way up to the Romans, Julius Caesar, admiring the Greek heroes of the Iliad. War, conquest. The deification of passion, revenge, cunning, anger, adventure, knowledge. The noble ideal, and you don't have that meaning here in China, but we thought in the West that there was a time when we had a kind of aristocracy, especially in ancient Greece, and that Christianity overthrew the ancient aristocracy and put in its place a common, very common, everyday, not very intelligent, not very emotionally competent kind of human being as the highest type. The noble type is denied. The beauty, wisdom, power, and awfulness of the type of man, the man who has aims, the future. Okay. So for all of these things about humanity that Nietzsche wants to hold on to as, in some way or another, expressions of growth and development and richness and fullness of life behind all of these thoughts. For him is the fundamental thought that richness and fullness of life, abundance of life, overflowingness of life is expressed behind this noble ideal. So Nietzsche's claim is it's really overflowingness, overabundance, richness, and fullness of life that Christianity wants to deny. So I know I haven't filled in all the argument there, but the sketch is that the values of Christianity are aimed at stopping humanity from evolving into a species of overflowing life. That you could put up. Let me see. The values of Christianity. I'm running out of headroom there. I'm running out of everything. The values of Christianity stop us from developing into beings of overflowing life. That's for sure. The values of Christianity stop us from developing into beings of overflowing life. That is what he believes. Let me just write that a little neater. Overflowing life. Überflüssige Leben. Now, I haven't proved that that's true yet. I've just stated it. You know, this is philosophy, so we don't just, you know, say stuff. We actually have to prove it. And there's lots of argumentation to show that the values of Christianity do have this intent. And Nietzsche sees it as not just an accident. He sees Christianity as a conspiracy against the human race. As designed, so as designed to stop us from being the creatures that we are capable of being. Okay. Now, let me see. I need to find a file. 1 second. There we go. Where to go? I had it. My computer crashing on me. Boy, you know, this computer does things that I cannot fathom. I mean, why would it suddenly stop working on that? All right, I can't open the file. Never mind, I remember what I was trying to say. Never mind. We'll just stay there. Let's go back to the phrase, why I am so wise. Keeping in mind that this book is a foreword to the revaluation of all values, is there a way to read Why I Am So Wise that could introduce the idea of a values reversal? Yes. If it does, if I can understand it that way, I can kind of make sense out of that title as not being a meaningless expression of an ego out of control. I can actually understand that. Here's why I can understand it. And we tried to say this last time. It was a little confusing. The values revaluation that I'm working on, says Nietzsche, overturns the ideal of democracy. Pity, after all, is the foundation of a morality of democracy. All people should feel compassion for one another, and so that is the foundation of being treated by each other as equals. I treat you as an equal because of your compassion for my state. You treat me as an equal for your compassion for my state. So the society that he sees coming, or that he's wishing to see come, in the society that exists under the values revaluation, is not a democracy at all. So his first idea of the future to come is that this democracy is an old Greek word, and it means the arche of the demos. And the demos is Greek referring to the people. And arche means rule. So demos arche means the rule of the people. Now, in contrast to democracy, is this word. Aristocracy. And it has the same ending, the arche, but the first part of the word is from the Greek ariston. And ariston means the best. Now, so aristocracy means the rule of the best. Nietzsche has a belief in a kind of aristocracy. But of course, it's not a kind of aristocracy that's ever existed. Historically, the only kinds of aristocracy we've had have been aristocracies based on heredity and kings and queens and their relationship, and I have a son, and I am King of England, and so he will be the next King of England after me, and we've traced our bloodline all the way back, and that's the Western conception of aristocracy. But the word itself doesn't imply any of that. The word itself just means the rule of the best. So we can use that word without it having all these bad historical and really silly connotations. The idea that just because I'm a descendant of somebody, I'm somehow socially better. Nietzsche thinks that's completely nonsense. There's no such thing as aristocracy as a social class. It could be a different kind of aristocracy, of nature, let's say, but not of social class. Holly Dolly.
How can you achieve aristocracy without
Because membership in it requires an individual act, and that you're past to enter it. There's no such thing as it propagating itself by itself. I don't get born into it. I don't get brought into it as a part of a club. I don't get admitted into it. Oh, we like you. Come join our club. And that can be aristocracy. In order to get in it, you have to do something. And every individual in there has done it. And the thing you have to do is this. You have to overcome yourself. Or if we wanted to get really fancy, we could say you have to overcome your epigenetic self. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But he has an idea that all human beings are capable of more abundance of life than they are displaying. And I have to find the destructive sources in myself that are keeping me from this richness of life and grapple with them. And if I achieve some degree of self-overcoming, I am in a position of self-command, and that position of self-command can also be a way in which others voluntarily will let themselves be commanded. Because by following my self-command, excuse me, by following my self-command, he says to another, you will achieve the same self-command for yourself. So only those who are accomplished at self-overcoming get into his aristocracy. Okay. Now, if the values reevaluation were in the direction of aristocracy to democracy, if it was going this way, then we said there's no reason for the person introducing democracy to say who they are, because there's no ranking in democracy. So everybody is the same as everybody else. So I don't have to preface a reevaluation going from aristocracy to democracy with a forward about who I am. Because I am, in democracy, just like everybody else. I am the same as all of you. So we don't care who I am. I could be you just as well as me. But if the reevaluation is going in the other direction, from democracy to aristocracy, then it really does matter who I am. because aristocracy is going to want to know who are you in order to be in the commanding position in our society. Okay, so that's why Ecce Homo exists, is to say, this is who I am in order to be in the position to initiate a values reevaluation. Now, why I am so wise. This is how I read that. This is, in the language of literature, you have to read it as rhetoric, meaning you have to pay attention to who the audience is to whom it's addressed. Who is the audience now? Well, we're in democracy. If we had the revaluation, we wouldn't be writing this. We don't have the revaluation. We have a democratic society, and that's all there is. Now, if I am writing to you in the democratic society, and I say I am so wise, that's really arrogant and annoying and a snotty thing to say to you that's going to really irritate you. How dare you say you're so wise? We're all equal. We can't all, nobody can be more wise than anybody else. We are all equally wise. This is a snotty and nasty thing to say. However, if it was, let's say that sometime in the future, people who are capable of self-overcoming, and I'll get to what I mean by overcoming the epigenetic self, which I really think is what's going on. And if I'm right, unless we do figure out the epigenetic inheritance that we're all carrying and figure out how to control it, we will probably destroy ourselves sooner or later, because it's accumulating over hundreds and thousands of years, and it's making us crazier all the time, probably. That is very possible. We don't know. Anyway, supposing I'm writing to people who are capable of some self-overcoming, and they read it. Well, they might, I hope, Nietzsche says, see in my statement why I am so wise a lesson plan of my how-to. In other words, I'm going to put in my chapter title, and I hope that these people of the future who are involved in self-overcoming can see it. I'm going to put in my chapter how I did it. It's my know-how. How I achieved a degree of self-overcoming. And if you, as an aristocrat of the future, someone in this sense capable of self-overcoming, look back and look at my chapter title and think that there's some know-how involved in your claim to be at the forefront of this values reevaluation, and you've already had some experience of that yourself, then you are likely to say, oh, well, I'm not part of that democracy, I'm something different, and I can see that he was writing to irritate that democracy. And isn't that funny? Ha ha. I'll bet it really annoyed and alienated a lot of people. It's deliberately alienating. Guess what? There's a whole literary movement of alienation in the theater of Bertolt Brecht. It's meant to be alienating. It doesn't make it crazy. And he might say, oh, ha ha, he was just alienating the democracy. Well, let me just laugh my way right past that and get into the chapter and find out what the know-how is that he is claiming to have developed further than anybody. And maybe there's a reason why he says that. Now, if that is making sense, if this is a forward, and it's a forward to a reevaluation from democracy to aristocracy, then A, the question, who am I, makes sense, and B, the snotty chapter titles kind of are forgivable, because they're only not forgivable if we stay stuck in democracy, which is the whole point. In other words, as long as you're irritated by this, you're not my reader. So it's a deliberate alienating wall. Oh, are you getting it? Yeah. Are we all getting it? Better than last time, right?
Yes.
Yeah? Oh, good. It's a deliberately alienating wall, and so long as you're alienated by it, you can't be the person for whom he's writing. That's what I'm getting at. So long as you're alienated by it, you're not the person for whom he's writing. Okay. Not half bad. Now, let's look at this excellent translation of Ecce Homo by Duncan Large. Now, we've talked, here it is, the opening of Why I'm So What. And we've talked about this idea that of the, are we still here? The modern development of epigenetics. And epigenetics, we said, is the subject of, that we're just beginning to investigate, that says, hey, we've all known about the inheritance of your parents' DNA, but we're now beginning to discover something else. That even though the DNA that I inherit from my parents is the same in the sequence, I seem to inherit something along with that DNA, or something certainly happening along with DNA besides just DNA. Something is happening called an epigenome that is coding for the expression or the downregulation of genes on the DNA. And if the genes are calling for upregulating by the epigene, then that has a consequence for how I think and how I feel. And if the epigenome calls for downregulating, that could also have a consequence on how I think, how I feel, what my diseases might be. And we've been studying epigenetics in connection with such mental diseases as depression. We noticed that the survivors of the Holocaust in World War II, even after many generations, had a greater susceptibility to depression than we were able to account for, even after we factored out all the other circumstances of this, that, and the other thing happening in their lives. Even so, we make allowances for all that. There's still a high incidence of depression, and we started to think that can only be because of a effect on the genes that is causing downregulating of genes that control activity in the brain, and that may be the foundation of heritable depression. Something like that, right? Yeah, so I mean that's the basic concept of what we're studying. The possibility that our psychological life is affected by the experiences of our forebears. Okay, now Nietzsche was a believer in an early version, if it was an early version, of that idea called Lamarckianism. And he expresses his relationship to his father using the language of inheritance and heritability, but he uses it not in a modern sense, but in the sense of his time as it was put forth by this biologist Lamarck. So we can't really be confident that he understands what we would mean by heritability and inheritance. Doesn't matter. He still has, for some reason, chosen that language. And when we look at what he says about what he inherited from his father, there's no question that as we read it, it really sticks out as an expression of an epigenetic inheritance from his father. Okay. So we'll just read this quick. The fortunate thing about my existence, it really means the happiness of my existence in German, das Glück, is perhaps its unique feature is also what will be the ultimate fate of my life. And I'll put this fact of myself in the form of a riddle. And this is, where is this standing? This is standing right as the first line of why I'm so wise proper. So this is, if I'm trying to go find what he has to say about himself that puts him in the position to revalue all values, well, here it is. To put it in the form of a riddle, as my father I have already died. As my mother I am still alive and growing old. And we'll not worry at the moment about the use of the word riddle there, but it does refer back to a Greek myth of Oedipus. Well, maybe we'll say it. Nah, you don't know enough about that. We'll just skip that. I can tell you another time, but I have to go into a whole little story and I don't want to interrupt here. So as my father I've already died, as my mother I'm still alive and growing old. The riddle is, who lives on having already died? How is that possible? Who lives on having already died? Nobody. Well, the only way that could be is if you were already dead from the start. And that's Nietzsche's situation. What? I'm already dead from the start. I'm not understanding you. Well, let's read a little more. You're not supposed to yet. This twofold provenance, it would be better to translate this maybe as descent or origin or past in lineage. This twofold descent, as it were, both from the top and bottom rungs on the ladder of life. I'm the top and the bottom rungs on the ladder of life. I don't know where we got the top rung. The bottom rung, I guess, must be that he already died. I don't know where the top rung is. The top rung clearly cannot be his mother. It's not miswritten. The top and the bottom rungs were deliberately meant to contract both the top and the bottom rungs as descended, as lines of descent from his father. But we have to figure that out. The bottom rung as descent from his father is obvious, or at least it's obvious where we would look for a meaning. We would look for the meaning of whatever he means by already died. Sounds like the bottom of something. Decadent, it means declining in life. But where would top be? The answer is because from my father, not only did I get the bottom rung, but that bottom rung was also served as a resistance against which I exercised life in myself to overcome. And in the overcoming of the resistance of, that I got from my father of being already dead, I learned all there is to learn about the overthrowing of Christian values, the overturning of values that express deterioration, decline, death, and the emergence from their overthrowing of values of life and abundance of life. And that's what the guy says. So I, from this twofold descent, really from my father, because you can't make sense of him saying that from my mother I am descended from the top of the rung on the ladder of life. It makes no sense. And there's some text that I can show you too that suggest that he has in mind that the top and the bottom rungs are both his father. This twofold descent from the top and bottom rungs of the ladder of life on both the decadent, meaning that's his word in French for someone on the decline of life, life in the old Greek sense of bios, as in biology. I mean life. I don't mean the course of the things happening to me. I mean my aliveness. Scary, huh? Isn't it? I mean, the guy is talking to you about his aliveness. You're a biologist. Oh, here's a guy manipulating him. Yeah, Joy?
Nietzsche's father lost part of his brain, right?
Yes.
Do you think that it is possible that Nietzsche lost part of his brain when he's writing this book?
No.
Why not?
Well, we don't know. We've never autopsied. There was never an autopsy on Nietzsche, but he was examined pretty carefully by medical people in both of the clinics that he was admitted to, both at Basel and later at Jena, by competent physicians. And from what we look, when we look over the medical reports that are left, we have pretty much ruled out any kind of brain disease or brain tumor or any organic anything. That at least is the conclusion of a philosophical biography of Nietzsche written in 2010 by Julian Young. And according to him, the breakdown was entirely psychological, go on joy, and there was no biological deterioration. Continue. What were you going to say? I made you forget?
Maybe Jay has something to say.
Jane, do you have something to say?
No, I just feel confused why we should pay so much attention to the sentence he wrote about the I am still, I have already died. As my mother, I'm still alive. I think maybe Nietzsche was just writing about something, just write something. Because I think when I'm writing, I maybe also write something like this. I would not intend to do this.
Okay, it's possible. Then the answer is when you write like that, do you continue the development of that idea in a systematic way? So yeah, you kind of don't. So you can say things like that, but as we read the whole chapter and we read the over and over the same internal structure of a twofold descent. It's repeated in section 3. He talks about this twofold descent also leading to a double line of experiences. So the answer to your question is, what we really need is close reading of the whole text and noticing the repeated structure of being already dead and still alive, and that theme repeating itself so much that it can't be an accident. So the answer is it's too sophisticated in its internal structure for it just to have been something casual that popped into my mind. And he's not a casual writer. And anything that's going on a page is in incredibly intense concentration. Also, he tells us that. He says, I weighed every word of this with extreme care. And when we see how he edited it, because we have the passages that he edited out, you can see that he really worked very, very hard on exactly what was being said here. But I can't really answer your question until we go through the first 3 sections of it. And if after the end of my presentation of section 3, you still think it was kind of just a thought that popped into your head, well, it could be. But I think I can convince you by then that it's a systematically developed idea and it means something specific. Because it's not the only time we get this. He says, I inherited a general lack of life force from my father. And he says, as my father, I have a foot beyond life. And as my father, I am a double walker with a foot beyond life. I am a shadow. A foot beyond life, who knows? Double walker is German word doppelganger. I have a second shadow that paces my earthly life in the world. And this other ghostly shadow is beyond life. He says, he says outright, I didn't receive life from my father. So it isn't just, and from my father I received basically a predisposition to an early death. But also, more importantly than that, in sections 4 and 5 of Ecce Homo, they both open with references to his father. As you can see, in this way I'm merely my father once again, and as it were, the continuation of his life after an all too early death. It takes quite a bit of work to figure out what that means in the opening of section 5. But if you systematically work through it, you will one day have an experience I had when I was 30 years old. I went, oh my God, this is not just, this is a guy looking into himself at a degree of, with a degree of clarity and at a level of self-understanding that's terrifying. And what he's saying about himself, oh my God. So my answer is stick with it for a while. Fine. So we'll just follow what sounds like well, not an argument, but a reason for something. He says, I am, because of this descent, both a decadent and a beginning. This, if anything, explains neutrality. I'm not going to talk about the neutrality statement, because it's actually kind of complex. The freedom from bias in relation to the problem of life that distinguishes me. I have a finer nose for the sign of ascent and descent than any man has ever had, because of this. But see, if that's all possible, because his father did lose 1/4 of his brain, and probably from tuberculosis of the brain, and probably that had onset before Nietzsche was born, and so something could have happened. Either we don't know. One possibility is that his brain may or may not have had to take over function for decaying parts of his brain, and that would have led to upregulating and downregulating of other genes on his DNA, and that would have been coded for in his epigenome that Nietzsche may have inherited. But it may not have. It may have been just that, as time went by, his father, as a result of losing so much of his brain, was also experiencing an emotional effect of increased weariness and increased feelings of susceptibility and weakness. And it may have been that even if there was no epigenome transferred from Nietzsche's father to Nietzsche, it could have been that in his early stages of fetal development, the first few months, Nietzsche might have been exposed to the psychological effects from his father of the loss of 1/4 of his brain as it was developing, and Nietzsche may have, that psychological environmental impact could have caused upregulating and downregulating of his genes and developing an epigenome for it that may have caused his brain to act differently. But there's no question that, and I don't think there can be any question that Nietzsche would not have been who he was if his father had not had brain disease. That's just not thinkable. But exactly how that works, we don't know. But I think, but we didn't, but the answer to that question is in epigenetics, and we didn't always know that. We've only known that for, well, since epigenetics really started moving. But no one in the Nietzsche world has ever fooled around with that idea. But if we can make that, I don't know. It depends on how much more we discover about epigenetics, and this little body of facts we have maybe can say more to us the more we learn about epigenetics. Who knows? But it now seems to be plain that Nietzsche would not have been who he was had he not had the father he had, and that the subject of epigenetics is the subject currently investigating those kinds of relations. And because of this, and see, and that would not be a crazy person. That's a person who's saying, I can't explain this exactly, but I got something from my father of an extreme state. I don't know how to describe it. Let me say it was already dead. Extreme feelings of weakness, susceptibility, decay, decline, and along with it, terrible feelings of vengefulness and vindictiveness were consuming my father gradually. And I was reared in that psychological environment, and so I became super sensitive to it in the surrounding environment. Something like that is probably true. It's certainly what this says, and the discoveries in epigenetics give it some foundation in empirical fact. So this might not be the raving of a madman. I have a finer nose for the sign of ascent and decline and descent than any man has ever had. I am the teacher above all. I am the foremost teacher in such matters. I know both, I am both. Now that may not be the raving of a lunatic. And if it isn't the raving of a lunatic, we really need to pay attention to it, because what it's saying is, I can spot descent where you can't, and I can spot ascent where you can't. And I am spotting descent in the values of Christianity, and I'm writing about it in all my books. All my books are an unmasking of the horrible psychology of the Christian. And I have tracked it because my inheritance from my father has given me a kind of compass where I'm able to follow and track and write about it, and into its deepest recesses, and into its most vindictive thinking. That's what he says. We simply don't believe it because we don't have a possible empirical model for how that could be true. But the guy is making endless empirical statements. This is what's true about the unconscious mind of the Christian religion. And he's making empirical, means factual, subject to scientific discovery. Largely, our problem has been that the people reading Nietzsche are philosophers who don't know anything about this. Philosophers aren't trained in biology. They're trained to read this as, they are trained. There's no training. There's absolutely no philosophical training that equips you to read, to understand those sentences. No, period. There's no literary training. You can give it a literary meaning, but as far as psychology, some people have attempted, but that isn't philosophy then, some people have attempted a Freudian reading of it. Sarah Kaufman certainly did. Our book, we don't have to talk about that. But as far as philosophy is concerned, forget it. It's an empirical statement. This is an empirical statement. It's either true or false as a matter of fact. And if it is true, oh boy. I know both, I am both. Back to my father. My father died at the age of 36, quite young. He was delicate, kindly, and morbid, as morbid as means. Suffering from deathliness. He is like a being destined only to pass by. More a remembrance of life than life itself. See, Jane? So it's starting to get systematic. But how systematic? Well, I'll show you. It gets really logical. It becomes involved in logical argumentation. So it gets pretty sophisticated. It gets extremely sophisticated. Especially the opening of section 5. In the claim that I am the continuation of my father's life after an all-worldly death. That is one extremely subtle sentence. We'll get to it when we get to 5. In the same year as his life declined, mine declined too. In the 36th year of my life, I reached the nadir, meaning the low point, the lowest point of my vitality. I was still alive, but I could not see 3 steps ahead of me. And at that point, it was 1879, I had to resign my professorship in Basel. And I lived through the summer like a shadow in St. Moritz, and the following winter, the least sunny of my life, as a shadow in Naumburg. This was my minimum. I wrote this book, The Wanderer in the Shadow, at this time. I was without doubt an expert in shadows in those days because he'd become one. In other words, whatever this means when he talks about himself as a ghostly double, a doppelganger, ghostly shadow, he had slipped a little bit more into that side than half. I had 1 foot here, 1 foot there. Well, at this point, it was more like I had 1 foot there and 3/4 of the other foot there as well. The following winter, the first in Genoa, the sweetening and spiritualization that are more or less bound to result from extreme anemia and atrophying of the muscles produced daybreak. You don't have to worry about that. That's another book. And the reason why, we're starting to get this, but remember there's going to be a chapter called Why I Write Such Good Books. And he's producing the autobiographical foreword to all of his books. But the idea is not retrospective. Who cares? It's forward-looking. I'm not writing